they say, you guys spread Islam by the sword. And that's the other extreme. What is the truth of the matter? Was Islam spread by the sword? Or is it all defensive and lovey-dovey and whatnot? What is the real, we had to fight, that's why I went and fought. What is the reality? Well, the fact of the matter is that in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, we can say without being apologetic at all, that pretty much most of the battles were battles that were defensive in nature. That's very clear. You don't have to be an apologetic at all. Look at the situation. Who was persecuting whom? Who kicked whom out of their lands? Who was the one? So it's very clear that Badr and Uhud and Ahzab were very necessary. And even the conquest of Mecca, like it had to be done if you had to survive. You can't just let them keep on attacking you. So in the seerah of the Prophet, we can say that very clearly most of the battles were necessary and were defensive to gain the rights of the Muslims back. However, it is also true to say that not all such battles can easily be put into this category. Some battles, especially some saraya, and remember saraya was the expeditions the Prophet did not participate in, he sent others out. Many of the saraya, especially in 9th and 10th Islam, there was no dire need, there's no threat at all. Going to the fringes of Oman, for example, right? Going to the other side of Bahrain, for example, it's not as if there was an immediate threat in some of those saraya. And especially we talked about the Battle of Tabuk. The Battle of Tabuk remains a big question mark amongst seerah specialists. Why? Why was one of the largest armies ever sent up north? For what? And in reality, it seems one of the strongest reasons is to show the powers up north that Muslims meant business and that they are going to attack, which is why Abu Bakr as-Siddiq took the initiative to attack. Followed the same route when he went to attack Sham. Same route of Tabuk, and he went from Tabuk onwards. So the process was basically setting the precedent for them. Now, whatever is the case about the time of the Prophet, there is simply no denying that the Khulafa al-Rashidun and the Umayyads engaged in offensive conquest of other lands. The Sassanid Empire did not pose any immediate threat. They were not attacking the Muslims at all. In fact, as we will study, when the Muslims attacked the Sassanid Empire, Rustum said, what are you guys doing here? Why are you attacking us? We're not bothering you. What are you doing over here? Remember, that was the famous, we'll get to that conversation today and next time as well. And the Romans as well couldn't care less about the Arabs. Remember, we said this from the very beginning. Both the Romans and the Persians, or I should say the Byzantine Empire and the Sassanid Empire, that's the more precise term, they were minding their own business, fighting each other. And they were not fighting the Arabs at the time because they didn't see any strategic advantage in controlling the Arabs. The Arabs were not a civilization that offered anything to them, and they didn't care about oil back then, right? Unlike now. So there was no reason for them to invade. If they had wanted to invade, there could have been no stopping them before the coming of Islam. But there was no reason for them. Now that Islam has conquered and is solidified, there was still no immediate reason for them to invade. There's no threat at all. And yet Abu Bakr as-Siddiq sent armies of tens of thousands of people. And Umar ibn al-Khattab followed suit. And the same goes when Umar ibn al-Khattab sent Amr ibn al-As into Egypt. Egypt was not sending any army into Arabia. And Amr ibn al-As with 4,000 people said, give me 4,000 people, I will give you Alexandria, which was the capital of that region. I'll give you Alexandria. Why? What was Alexandria doing to the Muslims? Nothing. So the claim that, oh, all of this is a defensive battle, frankly, it's not proven by anything, and it goes against common sense. Why would you send tens of thousands of people when there's no threat at all? And the fact of the matter, therefore, there is simply no denying this. And the same goes, by the way, even for our lands of India, of Sindh, Makran, and they established, the Umayyads established an extension of the Umayyad dynasty over there, and that was the beginning of Multan. Multan was the earliest Islamic land. Makran and Multan, these areas were the earliest Islamic lands. From the time of the Sahaba, some of the Sahaba were alive at this time when Multan was conquered. What for? You're going to establish a mini dynasty over there? For what? So clearly, there's not just a defensive jihad going on here. There's no denying that the early Muslims wanted political conquest. Now, is that problematic? Should we try to explain it away? All we need to do is contextualize. Firstly, everyone did it, without exception. Every superpower at the time was attacking every other power. That's how those powers survived. It was the law of the time. In fact, it was the law up until medieval Europe, where look at France and England, for example. I mean, if you ever study their history, all you do is memorize one battle after another, after another, after another. Keep on, they're fighting each other up until modern times. Now they're fighting over culture and cuisine and language and whatnot. Still, physical conflict, military conflict was a part of life. And there were regions of the world that switched hands literally dozens of times between competing powers. Damascus is one example. One era it's under the Persians, then it's under the Romans, then it's under the Persians, under the Romans. And the border between the Sassanid Empire and the Byzantine Empire was never established. They're always fighting one another. And Damascus is kind of in the middle. So you had times when the Persians controlled Damascus. Then you had times, most of the time, Romans controlled Damascus. And the same goes for so many other small cities as well. So this was a time frame where everybody is attacking everybody. It's a fact of life. Why should the Muslims be any different? As well, there's no denying that of the goals of early Islam was indeed to spread the political power of Islam. In fact, is not that the goal of every civilization? Why were the Romans fighting everybody else? Why did Alexander in ancient times go and conquer everybody else? That's how civilizations flourished. There's nothing strange about early Islam doing the same. And in our times, by the way, perhaps it is true that the major superpowers technically don't want to, or I shouldn't put it that way, they technically give the impression they're not invading other lands and countries without provocation. But okay, suppose, ignore all of the military conflict. Doesn't every nation in our time strive its best to get the most political clout and economic clout and military might than other nations? This is what nations do. This is exactly what every civilization does. And in our times, they might choose other tactics, many of which are unethical. The IMF, for example, right? The superpowers of our times, they use the International Monetary Fund, for example, or they'll use the United Nations. But in essence, each country and civilization strives to get the most power for itself, including the one we're living, especially the one we're living in. This is a fact of life that is historically undeniable. So why should we sugarcoat for our own tradition as well? Yes, early Islam wanted political dominion, and guess what? They got it. They got it. They put their eyes on the prize, and they indeed got it. A third reason we will mention here, and this gets a little controversial, is the issue of conversion. Did these early Muslims want to convert the people that they're conquering? Give me an honest response. What do you guys think? Did they want them to convert? Sure they did. Was that a motivational factor? Yeah, jazakallahu khairan. That's what I wanted to hear. This is the reality. If it wasn't a motivational factor, my ancestors worshipped cows. I would still be worshipping cows if they hadn't come. Your ancestors worshipped a cross. And if it weren't for the blessings of Allah through these conquests, probably you would also be worshipping a cross now. Do we understand this? We should stop sugarcoating. That's the reality. They came not just for political power, yes for political power, yes for economic power, but as well they did want the people to convert. Now we get to the second question, which is what you were trying to get at, right? But I want to get the difficult out of the way. Did they force people to convert? That question we can alhamdulillah say without being apologetic, because that is a fact. No, they didn't force people to convert. They did not force people to convert, And in fact, they knew that it was not a part of their religion to force people to convert. It is because they did not force people to convert that to this day, the lands that were under the Mughal Empire, majority of them are still Hindu. The lands that were under the Muslims of Egypt, when the Muslims entered Egypt, literally 99.999999% were Coptic Christians, right? This is a documented historical fact that has been, lots of research has been done on this by looking at the registrars of names, Christian names versus Muslim names. And plenty of research has been done, and we notice and we find that in Egypt, for example, over the course of the last, especially the first 12 centuries of conquering, not the last 200 years, not since the British came. When the British came, colonialization, that changed everything. But up until the era of Napoleon, when did Napoleon enter Egypt? 1798. 1798 he entered Egypt. Up until the era of colonization, which is relatively recent, 1798 is after America was founded. Okay, that's when colonialism begins with Napoleon invading Egypt. This is the beginning of European colonization of Islamic lands. Up until that point in time, the conversion rate from Coptic Christianity to Islam never spiked at one time from 0 to 100. Rather, we see from the conquest of Islam up until Napoleon, slowly the numbers just continue to increase until they kind of peter out at 90%, which is what Egypt is now. 90% Muslim, 10% Coptic. To this day, Egypt, which was 100% Coptic, 1 out of every 10 Egyptians is still a Coptic. Why? Because there really was freedom of religion. There really was, not the types of freedom that exist in the modern West, there's no doubt about it, let's not again sugarcoat, not the types of freedoms, but there was the freedom to be a Coptic Christian, to worship, to practice the laws of Coptic Christianity, to do the rituals, to pass it down to your children. You could remain Coptic, and that therefore 1 out of every 10 Egyptians to this day remain Coptic. Okay, so never in the history of Islam, and this is not being apologetic, this is the truth, was a sword waved in the face of somebody and he was told, convert or die. That didn't happen. But did the Sahaba and the early Muslims desire their subjects to convert? Wallahi they did. Of course they did.